question comes from Dean Smith, who's in the Crockett territory, less than an hour outside of Asheville. Jim, you have talked...
Wait a minute. Dean Smith.
Dean Smith.
In the Carolinas.
That's right.
Okay.
He's a big fan.
He's a big fan.
Yes. Jim, you have talked a lot about the career of Bill Watts as a booker and some of his later wrestling career, like his angle with JYD, but I've never heard anyone talk about the early wrestling career of Bill Watts. Do you have any stories or highlights about a young Bill Watts? Also, why did Dave Meltzer rate pushing this is worded so fucking badly. Also, why did Dave Meltzer...
Well, hey, the basketball players and coaches don't necessarily have to be straight A students. Go ahead.
Why did Dave Meltzer rate I can't even read it. It's so bad with that. Why did Dave Meltzer rate WCW pushing Eric Watts as the worst promotional tactic of 1992?
Well, starting that first, it wasn't the worst promotional tactic. It was just, it was poorly planned out. Eric was not ready for that spot. I don't know that he ever got ready. He wasn't in the business long enough to get ready. But once again, even the great ones sometimes have a blind eye toward the family. But I don't know that it was the worst promotional tactic of 19. Imagine how much territory that would take in 1992. But it was not a good thing to do. As far as Watts' early wrestling career, unfortunately, I wasn't around because he got into business. I think his first year was 62, wasn't it? Somewhere around there. I know that he had tremendous success. That's where he was a big guy especially for the time when athletes weren't that big in those days. And he'd had a great football background and coming out of Oklahoma was a well thought of amateur athlete. So he got a lot of opportunities because that's what they were looking for in those days, were real legitimate guys. He had a tremendous run with Bruno. I think, 64, 65, he had the run in Madison Square Garden and in the old WWF with Bruno, and Bruno liked him, got him a variety of spots and put a word in for him with different promoters. He had a great run then he went back home, and that's where he first started realizing that he wanted to get into promotion, because Watts was always a smart guy. And he saw that there was big money in wrestling, but there was bigger money in booking and promoting, and he wanted to learn about it. But he worked all over. He established himself real early on with the NWA by being a top heel in Florida. Learned from Eddie Graham, soaked that up like a sponge, just like Dusty did. So he was never a finesse guy. We used to have a joke. When we worked with the Midnight Express, or we worked with them, the Midnight Express against Watts in the last Stampede, all the guys said, watch out when Watts calls drop kick. What do you mean? He would shoot you off and he'd call drop kick. And it was a rib because everybody knew Watts wasn't going to leave his fucking feet. So his drop kick was he'd shoot you off. When you came back, he'd hit you with a standing big right punch right in the fucking face. That was the drop kick. He was just a big fucking guy that was believable and pushed people around and used his fucking weight on them and fucking hammered them. But his psychology was he would sell when the time was right. He'd get juice when the time was right. But his psychology was more important, as it was with most people in those days, than his actual execution of his work. So he was by no means, the smoothest worker in the world, but at the same time, he drew money everywhere he went, and he got over enough in his home territory that he was eventually able to take the book for Leroy McGurk and eventually able to take the territory from Leroy McGurk. So, that's the way you did it in those days. And he made a shit ton full of money doing it.
What a career, too. I mean, one of the greatest talkers of all time. And then with Bruno, he never went back. I mean, think about that. Him and Bruno, he turns on Bruno. That's the hot program. And then he leaves. And I believe one of the reasons was he beat up a fan and there was the threat of a lawsuit and he had to leave. But he never came back to New York. Huge star in the AWA.
That's right. Had a great run with Vern.
San Francisco. He trained under Roy Shire also in terms of people who developed Bill Watts' brain as a booker. Roy Shire, Eddie Graham, Vince McMahon Sr., Vern Gagne in his prime. He went everywhere.
I don't really think it was probably one of those deals where he didn't need to go back at that point to New York because he had his eyes on his home territory, and any way he could get in with the NWA was always a boon. So he worked Atlanta. He was booking Atlanta when when the original or was one of the bookers of Atlanta when the original war with Van Gunkel was going on.
Got 10%.
Yeah, he started getting ownership of pieces of these different promotions. Was like I said, in with the NWA, with Eddie Graham, with all those guys. It just probably never came up that he needed to go back to the WWF because he probably knew he wasn't going to get a piece of that.